Dr. Ramzi Salti is a lecturer in Arabic at Stanford University. He earned his PhD in comparative literature at the University of California, Riverside. He's the host of Arabology, a radio program that airs on KZSU at Stanford. He's the author of several collections of short stories, as well as academic writings, articles in the LA Times and other media. Dr. Salti is an immense presence here on campus, and his love of teaching and mentorship has earned him many prestigious awards, including the Dean's Award for Distinguished Teaching and teaching awards from the ASSU, which is the student union, and the Knight Professor Award. I guess without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Salti. Thank you.
So can everyone hear me? Maybe like this. So to everybody who stayed after a movie, which wasn't short, thank you for staying. Shukran, merci, gracias, toda. In all languages, I want to welcome you to this very, very groundbreaking, controversial movie. You might have hated it, you might have liked it, you might have hated parts, liked parts. I hope we can discuss both the implications and the positive and perhaps what you see as negative aspects of this film. The discussion, I'm welcoming all points of view, and I'm sure that, this is an Israeli film made by a director who identifies as a Palestinian director living in Israel, and I was in touch with her, Maysaloun, by Skype yesterday, and she wanted to say thank you to everybody who's here. We wanted to kind of Skype her in, but the time difference was a little brutal. So on behalf of Maysaloun, I'd like to say welcome to the post-movie discussion. So the microphone's okay, Zach? What do you think of it? No, it's bothering everybody. I can speak. This is Denise, everybody. I will try to speak up, and hopefully you can hear me, because I'm going to turn it over to questions very quick, because I'm really, really curious to know your take on this film. Please feel free to discuss anything about the film. Just because the director will see this video doesn't mean she doesn't appreciate constructive criticism, so feel free to critique, to applaud, and to negate whatever you like in this film. Let me tell you about the film. In between, in Arabic, it is Bar Bahr. And Bar in Arabic means land, and Bahr means sea. And this movie is supposed to take place in the spaces between the land and the sea. Now, if you're looking at it as sexuality being sort of this wide spectrum, then we're looking at those spaces between what you would consider totally heterosexual and totally homosexual, whatever you want to call it. There's also the terminology that is used. I mean, are these Western constructs, when you talk about, LGBTQ issues in America, are those the same labels that they would use in the Arab world, in Israel, or in the Middle East as a whole? So I think that was very interesting to see the cross-section between languages. Most of the movie was in Arabic, but certainly you heard Hebrew, and I think the intersections between Hebrew and Arabic in the film are very constructive and can lead to a very enriching dialogue. So the film has won many awards, and Maysaloun Hamoud is very proud of that. She has been controversial, as you may guess, so certainly there are people who love her, people who hate her, but the movie, whether you love it or hate it, is making waves and is creating a much needed dialogue that centers on marginalized sexualities in the Arab world. The soundtrack to the film, I think, was superb. Did you kind of hear this music that was coming out? Well, one of them, the theme song, it was called Aziza, and it is sung by Yasmin Hamdan, who is a Lebanese underground artist. I call her the queen of underground music in the Arab world. She was at Stanford, Zach, a while back. She's a very gutsy singer, very opinionated and strong woman who came to Stanford and sang her heart out. She sang for peace, she sang for love, and she is extremely, extremely talented. So it is very symbolic and important that the theme song was that of Yasmin Hamdan, because the film, after all, was broaching the topic of feminism, of female sexuality, of sexuality in general, within an Arab or Palestinian context, but within the state of Israel. So you can imagine the kind of layers that get discussed in this film. So I think I'm going to go right away for the questions. I'm not the type that wants to take over Zach. Certainly I'm happy to answer you, but I'm going to attempt to remain neutral as much as I can in terms of guiding your questions. And I see a wonderful gentleman there who's gutsy enough to be the first. Assalamu alaikum, salam, shalom, bonjour, buongiorno.
That's enough.
That's enough.
So I want to know, how old is this film? I'm not sure.
So this film was released in 2016. So it is a year and a half
How
old.
is it received in Israel and Palestine?
So that's a really good question. It has been received well on both sides. So both the Israeli and the Palestinian public has embraced the film for its groundbreaking value. Certainly I'm not saying all elements of either society, but it has been received, it has gotten awards. So that was something that was very fulfilling for Maysaloun, who I talked to yesterday. She couldn't believe that she was actually receiving awards from both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. So often divided, but perhaps through film and music and cultural productions like this one, we can attempt to bridge the sides and create a dialogue. Did you like it?
Yep,
Alhamdulillah.
for sure.
So who else has a question? Oh, Aktham. I have to say, a good friend of mine who always comes to support us. Assalamu alaikum wa Ramadan Kareem, Habibi.
So as a Palestinian, I don't really know what to make of this film. I missed the first half hour, but I kind of get the gist of the film. What bothers me, well, foremost, that since it's basically an Israeli-made film, when
It
I
is.
see the Palestinians are being portrayed as one guy's a rapist, another bunch of other women who are coke-sniffing women, and all they do is take drugs and drink all the time and smoke marijuana. So I mean, maybe that's prevalent nowadays in major cities in Palestine, Israel. I don't know, but that kind of disturbs me. I mean, maybe that's the norm, but I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard Aktham, but he was saying that it seemed to him that every Palestinian in the film, whether they want to identify as Arab Israeli or Palestinian, I mean, I leave it up to them, Aktham, Maysaloun herself wants to identify as a Palestinian who lives in Israel, a Palestinian citizen of Israel. But he was saying that every portrayal of the Palestinians was negative. And I'm just going to give you my opinion here, Aktham. Certainly, I think it was a very colored, nuanced characters. She did want to make a point about the hypocrisy that sometimes accompanies religion, but I would alert you to the father, for example, who when he found out his daughter had been raped, instead of doing, that was a very positive character. I think Abu
Did he
Zur...
know she was raped, or he just thought he was broken up?
Yeah, I mean, he accepted her, and these are the interpretations that, we're all open to, including you. But I think that there were some, more positive than negative. The other thing was the portrayal of drugs and alcohol and even cigarettes as such a daily part of the existence of these women who feel often marginalized. I mean, the Arabs are 48, Arab al-Dakhil. They are, I always feel I feel an affinity towards them because they're often rejected by both sides. They're Israeli citizens, but they feel proud of their Palestinian identity. But then when they are LGBT, they tend to be sometimes ostracized from the Arab community that they so yearn to be part of. And then they're accepted within Israeli community, but then they don't feel as Arabs and proud Palestinians that they're accepted by Israeli society as well. So it's these very interesting spaces. What do you do when you're, Palestinian, and gay, or Palestinian and lesbian? Where do you belong? And I think the movie does a good job of not telling you where they belong. In fact, it's the state of fluidity. And I think that...
didn't bother me so much, the sexual orientation.
Yeah, sure,
okay
sure.
with that.
No, but I mean, I was leading up to say that often drugs and this kind of thing is a way, and I'm not saying Maysaloun is celebrating that, but I think it's prevalent in a lot of LGBT communities, especially when you're living in a state where you're dealing with occupation, you're dealing with different, concepts of identity. I think that maybe she was showing it in a way not to celebrate it, but rather to say that often these people don't have recourse to much, and that this kind of lifestyle sometimes helps you drift away from your reality, even momentarily. I know Maysaloun is not, endorsing this kind of lifestyle, but is pointing to it, having done a lot of research there. Shukran, Habibi Haitham, shukran. Yes, the wonderful young lady here.
So it is Israeli.
Shalom.
I believe what I loved that movie, absolutely. I think what I love the most about it is its empowerment of the women.
Women.
It's not necessarily the promiscuous behavior or drugs as if maybe were pushed over the limit. Cigarettes are everywhere. Pregnant women.
Well, Axel knows, he's from the Middle East.
So what I loved about it is independence of women. And very successful women. You're talking to doctors, you're talking to lawyers in this movie. And is the camaraderie among those women. They come together, to help. They don't need any words to understand what happened to this poor girl, right? They can feel it. And I think it was portrayed extremely well, and it came across, at least for me, that love, the camaraderie, and the males in this movie, like it or not, are secondary to the relationship that are within that tiny community of 3 women living in that small apartment in the middle of Tel Aviv, which is an amazing country, by the way, as Israel, not Tel Aviv.
Well, let me say that the theme of female empowerment is exactly what Maysaloun was trying to say, and perhaps I'm going to take it one step further and say that any kind of reconciliation between Palestinians and Israel may have just happened through women empowerment, and perhaps even through LGBT societies and marginalized sexualities. I also think that instead of looking at these Arabs of 48 or Palestinians of 48 or whatever we want to call them, or however they want to identify, I respect that. I think instead of looking at them as being rejected by both sides, I like to look at them as perhaps they are the bridge that will bring both sides together. And I think Maysaloun did a good job. I mean, there were certain scenes. You talk about Tel Aviv. I mean, this month in America is Gay Pride, and everybody's talking about it, but Tel Aviv Pride was huge. But at the same time, yeah, and I think that is beautiful in terms of being in Israel where that is celebrated. But there also, it stands in sharp contrast to some people with the way that certain human rights allegations are taking place. Gaza's going on right now, on whatever side you're on. I'm sure it's not a pretty sight at all to see. So that parade was kind of set against that backdrop. And what do you do if you are Palestinian or in Gaza and you're gay? Who do you stand with? Things like that. It's a very big question here. But I do want to bring it back to the center, and that is women, and also certain notions of feminism that are certainly Western here, that have been altered, but also certain notions of feminism are emerging from within Arab culture, from within Israeli culture, that are different and distinctly important, so that women in the Arab world don't have to identify with a Western kind of feminism immediately, but can use it as a way to find their own independence and position of enunciation. Thank you so much. Maysaloun is going to love your comment. Yes, sir.
There was one scene that impressed me a lot, and I think is the key to a lot of the things that she's doing. It's the scene where Noor goes swimming for the first time. The way that it's shot, there's an ambiguity about whether it's a pre-suicide or whether it's a liberation. And then you wonder, are those both a form of liberation?
Wow.
And you realize during the duration of that scene, you have no idea how it's going to go, how it's going to come across. Not until it's over are you sure. But much of the movie is like that. There's a lot of suspense there. In particular, since Noor is the key to the movie, we are anxious, eager to find out how she's going to react to situations. What is she going to do about this situation? And throughout the movie, we have these scenes of tension, which actually reminded me of Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Can you repeat
That
the
is,
question? We can't
Yes,
hear.
I'll let him finish and then I'll paraphrase it for you.
I'm done.
Oh, okay, so he was talking about that scene where you saw Noor in the ocean, when she went into the ocean. He was saying, is that a cathartic sort of liberal, she was washing herself clean kind of scene, or was it hinting at suicide, or could it be a little bit of both? And that scene particularly moved this gentleman. I think it was beautifully shot. Also the colors and the way that was done. So, I mean, I don't have the answer, but I think you had an amazing answer that it could be both. It could be hinting at both. And I think that is to Maysaloun's credit, where she can have a scene that can be interpreted by different people, different ways, or by the same person in a different way. I personally, when I saw the film the first time, I saw it purely as she's cleansing herself. It was this cathartic experience. But having seen it today as well, I think it was hinting at also the sea symbolizing many things. Having said that, I'm glad she's decided to stay around, because I think we need people to fight for the rights of women and Palestinians and everybody in the Middle East. Yes, hi.
So, I've never been to the Middle East, and I don't really have much of a context. I guess it's my first film about.
Oh wow! And you chose this film as an intro. Good for you. It's a good film.
I just assumed all three women were Palestinian, and that most of the main characters were Palestinian.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how different would the situation have been if the three women had been Jewish or Israeli Jewish? Would there have been the same conflict between their lifestyle and the expectations of their parents and of the men in their lives?
So the question here was about the three women, the three main women in the film, whose names were Layla, Salma, and Noor. And well, these three women identified as Palestinians, whether they said Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, Palestinians living in Israel, whatever they want to call themselves. They spoke Arabic and they were not Jewish. And so they live in Israel, but they also are Israeli citizens. And as such, they vote, and there is, a member of the Knesset to represent them, etc. So that's a whole other thing. So the question here was, what if they hadn't been Palestinian women living in Israel? I'm going to attempt to answer it by, first of all, letting you know, which I think a lot of people here may know, that although there were three Palestinian Arab women living in today's Israel, they were of different religions. You know that some of them were Christian Palestinian, some of them were Muslim Palestinian, some were, you didn't know. And so when you hear names like Abu George, which means father of George, that's a Christian family, just from the name George. And then you had, of course, with the veil, Noor is from a Muslim family. So I think that's another thing is, to be of a different religion and be Palestinian, because a lot of times people assume Palestinians are all Muslim, for example, and of course that is not the case. Christian Arabs date back to Jesus Christ, and we're talking about, Jewish, Muslim, and Christians should all go together in the Middle East, inshallah. And I think that was the message here, is no religion was sort of given a pardon. Now, I have not been to Israel either, but I think that from what I see, in terms of Tel Aviv, certainly there's a vibrant gay scene there. And I think that, with the parade that we talked about, it is huge and it is accepted. Not so much in parts of Jerusalem, right, where I know the parade once was threatened by Orthodox Jewish scholars who actually didn't want the parade to happen. So for those people who sometimes point to the Arab world and say they're all, homophobic and they all hate well, in Israel we also have a percentage of people who would be homophobic and would not accept. It just seems that, we underline the freedom that exists with Israel. But I was born and raised in Lebanon. And I tell you, we are having quite a bit of revolutions there, and women are standing up. And, I'm very proud of the way the Lebanese are attempting to change their society. It hasn't happened yet. We're in, en route, inshallah. Did you want to say something else? Yes.
Yes, if you don't
And then
mind
I'll
to answer you. Israelis are very liberal, but if you go to religious families, it will be exactly the same response as Palestinian
Wow.
parents. Absolutely. There will be
She was saying that Israelis in general tend to be more liberal, but that certainly it is no exception to find a really Orthodox, conservative Jewish family who would have rejected their lesbian daughter in this way or even worse. So I'm very, very happy to hear how you're able to see that it's not so much of a nationality thing or its ethnicity thing, but it's more about, degrees of religiosity or degrees of, how you interpret, I think, also your religion. Yes, hi.
I thought it was a very good movie. I enjoyed it. There were topics that were raised in this movie that I have not seen in any Middle Eastern type of movies. I'm originally from Iran.
Oh, wow.
So it is very empowering because these are the type of things that happens. Everybody knows, but it's not talked about. So it is good that it's being brought out, and I'm very happy that you said it won awards from both sides.
Yes,
So-
yes. And some international awards. I mean, you could just Google it and see this list of awards. And Maysaloun, this is her first major movie. She had done, short movies before. So to tell you, this nice lady is saying that she's originally from Iran and that she really enjoyed the film. And I wonder if there's any kind of Iranian films that are attempting to break the barrier or discuss that. I know the movie The Separation,
Not-
which
yes,
yeah,
I mean,
which was
the
nominated for an
topic-
Oscar.
The way it was, the rape scene,
Yeah.
for example, that was very, there are topics that are being discussed in
Right.
other movies, but not,
Yeah. I mean, if you've seen the film The Separation, which was the Iranian film that was nominated for an Oscar, it also talked about a rape. But the way it broached it was,
Yes.
this was much more explicit.
Yes.
And I think Maysaloun wanted to leave those disturbing scenes in there. I mean, that scene really disturbed me the first time. It never left me, and I was wondering why she had to leave the whole scene. And then the second time I'm seeing it, I think this is indeed what she wanted to show, and not sort of dramatize it as this, the way sometimes movies show rape, but kind of like showing its ugliness, but in its silence sometimes,
My second question, how old is she?
Maysaloun?
Yes.
So I didn't ask her that. I asked her a lot of questions on the thing. But she is young. She is young. I mean, this is her first film, and she's maybe in her 30s. I will double check for you. So the young lady over there.
So I'm Palestinian from Israel.
Ya ahlan wa sahlan. Shalom and salam.
It's very, very interesting. And I understand why it's controversial in the community. I think it's pushing the limits. Being a Palestinian, living in Israel, as the Israeli women there, hello, has alluded to, you live among a very liberal, Westernized country. Israel is secular, liberal, progressive. And, you go to university, high school, I went to a Jewish high school. So you're exposed, and you kind of like there's assimilation in a way, but she is trying to portray, but there is the cultural, it's still an Arab society, it's still rooted in its conservative. But the young generation is definitely feeling that, we're like the rest of the world. So she wants to bring that up front to start maybe a dialogue, start a conversation at home. So yes, there are lesbian women among the Palestinian women.
So yours is more of a poignant commentary, young lady. For those of you who didn't hear, this is a Palestinian citizen of Israel. How do you identify?
A Palestinian Israeli.
Palestinian Israeli, and you don't see that as being kind of an oxymoron or a paradox.
I
It flat.
actually formed a group just now. So I thought when I came to the Bay Area, I was like, maybe I knew another Palestinian Israeli family or like friends. But then with the boom of the high tech, there are a lot of Palestinian Israelis that are actually living in the Bay Area. And on the group that, well, hi.
So Palestinian, Israeli, American. Yeah, I mean identity and the labels. I've come to learn. What is your first name, young lady? Reem. Reem, I've learned, I don't know if you agree with me, but I'm in my 50s. I'm a little older than you. I've learned through the years to let people identify themselves the way they want, and I respect that. So I've had people saying, you know, they're Arab, Israelis, not Palestinian. I don't know. I think that erases Palestinian identity, but fine if that's what you want to be called. Some people want to be called Palestinian citizens of Israel. Some people want to be called Israeli because they're carrying the passport. Doesn't matter if they're of Palestinian or Arab origin. So I let people identify, which is exactly why I asked Maysaloun, who seems to be like your soul sister in a way, how she feels. And she said she did want to emphasize that she identifies as Palestinian and that she feels like she's an Israeli citizen, but that she's very proud of her identity. And this movie was really about the plight of women, Palestinian women, Arab women in Israel, not so much that of, you know, Jewish women in Israel maybe, in terms of Tel Aviv and the more liberal spaces. Yeah. Thank you, Reem, Habibti, shukran. Toda. Okay, let's have that nice lady over there. Hi. Right.
This could have been set in this country. It could have been set in India. It could have been set
That's a
in
really
any
good
place
point.
where there are traditions which limit.
Yeah, I love your comment because she said, in fact, I mean, the space of in-between, which was here applied to, you know, Israeli-Palestinian society, could have been placed in almost any other country where, you know, you're trying to create this space in between two identified, you know, sort of poignant identities. And so what do you do when you exist in the space in between and you don't want to belong to this side, or you can't belong to this side, you can't belong to that side? Perhaps it's in the state of fluidity between both sides that this is where you belong.
Those three women were wanting to be themselves in very different ways, and who were wanting to get married at the beginning. She was happy with the idea. But the trouble is they ended up, it's just each one thought they were becoming themselves, and then the traditions closed in on them, and there they are at the end, in between. They don't belong.
In between, but together. And I think there is the message that if you have two marginalized people and you put us all together, you form a certain family and a certain society of your own. So she was saying that all three women in the film discovered who they were and their own identity through the film, despite of traditions that were closing in on them. She also commented about the final scene in the film where they all looked sort of out of sorts. Yes, hi.
Okay. Along that lines, I found that the final scene was extremely moving. That she ended up tying in the whole theme of her movie, which was what she said, friends and family. Because all three women, they kind of got what they wanted and what they needed, and along the way they also lost something, but they gained something. So through it all, like the young girl,
Wow.
her father was there for her,
Yeah.
but she also had to give up something of herself, what she had thought she was going to be doing.
Right. Right.
And the girl who was going to be lesbian, her family turned on her, but yet she needed to do that.
I love that. This nice lady is talking about loss in the film and how, you know, you have to lose something to gain something, and that each of the three women in the film lost something in order to gain perhaps a new position of enunciation. It's a beautiful comment, ma'am. Thank you. Oh, okay. Yes, this gentleman who's
Ask you about what you think about the director's portrayal of men. The men in this movie were all this.
Were they?
Except for the father.
Well, there were a couple other male characters you might have
I
overlooked.
mean, there was not a portrayal of a high-tech or a professional in the society who maybe would be a counterbalance to all the people who were just doing drugs and having parties and drinking cocaine.
But were there any portrayals of women that were perfect in the film? I mean, I think all the characters were flawed to some degree. I don't.
There was a lawyer, right? The Korean was a
Right.
lawyer.
Yeah, the lawyer. Yeah. But male. You know, there was also, I don't know if you noticed, sir, but you know what, I hope you don't consider it flawed, but the gay Palestinian kid who was part of the crowd and who was attempting, you know, to live his life within that kind of society. I mean, the kind of drugs and whatever, certainly that is negative. The other thing, and this is just to quote Maysaloun for you, I mean, the movie also is attempting to broach patriarchy and a patriarchal system. And because of that, I think it was necessary for her to show the kind of men in this movie, perhaps even women, because I think some of the mothers were also oppressing their daughters. I think it was trying to show how a patriarchal kind of thinking ends up oppressing people. So for that, she needed to have these, you know, sort of patriarchal characters. Having said that, I think she did a good job of like showing different sides of degrees of tenderness within some of the fathers. Even if they were homophobic, it was more because they wanted to protect their daughters, because that's how they were taught. But perhaps it's time for us, the older generation, to rethink some definitions of sexuality and gender. Yes, sir. I love the people in this audience. Everyone raises their hand and points to who's sitting, and that's the most loving gesture. Please. Yes, please. Go ahead, ma'am. Yes. He was pointing to you.
Yeah, I think that the film director, the perspective, rather than being presenting national point of view or any race or any other, it's a pure feminist point of view.
Yes.
And more or less, the film is not optimistic at all. And the last scene of the movie show us clearly that these three women, after they tried everything, they did drugs, alcohol, sex, smoking, heavy smoking, to find themselves, kind of to separate themselves from this traditional society. And at the end of the movie, they discovered that it didn't work for them.
Yeah, it wasn't a happy ending.
Scene, the director shows up completely alienated
Yeah.
and completely perplexed. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah. So the lady saying that the movie was not optimistic, and I think we all agree, but that there is power, perhaps, in the pessimism that was necessary. I mean, this is not a film that could have, or I would venture to say should have, ended on a happy note where everybody got, you know. I think she had to leave it this way because of the realities that so many marginalized people are feeling in the world, perhaps, and in the Middle East particularly, where you're dealing, you know, with so many subsets of, you know, homophobia and Islamophobia, and, you know, it's just, and anti-Semitism, and, you know, all of it. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please.
But the positive thing about that, my wife was just...
He found you a positive, man.
Was the friendship, the three.
Yeah.
The way they took
And
care
how
of
they
it.
supported one another.
I'm going to speak for you, man, because I think we're on the same track. We stand corrected. The only positive, perhaps the most powerful positive, is the message that friendship forms families, and that this kind of support that you may not get from your family, you may actually make your own family. So I think that bond between three of them at the end, feeling alienated, but at the same time together, you know, and I think that is priceless. Yes, the young man, and then the nice lady, please.
I have a question, but I'll say that the last scene reminded me of Ian Chekhov's Three Sisters.
Chekhov's Three Sisters. I wonder if Maysaloun was perhaps, you know, influenced by that. I should ask her that. I'll ask her next time for you, young man.
I want to know that you can speak about the political exploitation of Palestinian Christians. So in the film,
Palestinian Christians.
is in the kitchen, and the boss tells her, "Don't speak Arabic."
Yeah, that wasn't so much of a Palestinian Christian thing. So he's talking about the scene in the kitchen where she actually, threw her, she left the job. Do you remember that scene? When the manager came and said, don't speak Arabic because it's unpleasant to the customers and you're trying to eat. So I think it seems like this. Another one was the scene in the store where when the lady, the woman working in the store heard them speaking Arabic, she was uncomfortable and she told her in Hebrew, she said, we don't bite. I mean, I like that Maysaloun doesn't shy away from the fact that, Arabs living in Israel, whether citizens or not, in Israel proper, let's say, are facing so much discrimination. And I just want to raise one last word, which I need to raise because Maysaloun raised it, or because people who talk about the movie, something called pink washing, whether you agree with it or not, but it's the fact that yes, Israel has so much rights for LGBT people, and nowhere in the Middle East can an Arab country compete with that. But at the same time, sometimes you focus on that at the expense of certain, political realities and situations that are happening. And I don't think that, I don't think they should be mutually exclusive, frankly. I also want to say, and very quickly, because I want to turn it over to the next question, which is this lady. I just want to say, often when you're talking about national movements and resistance, the plight of women and the plight of marginalized sexuality is always sort of put aside. Let's first get political stability, then we'll talk about the rights of women and the rights of gays and the rights of whatever. And so you always have that happening, and then it never happens, because once the revolution is won, if it ever is, then women are relegated back to the kitchen. Often we've seen that with the Arab Spring, and gays are back in, are being criminalized again. And so there is also that thing that why not speak about it while speaking of a national discourse, whatever side you're on, and hopefully you don't see the whole struggle as binary, but that the solution is somewhere in between. I think that, it is high time to speak about the plight of marginalized sexualities, of women's issues and gender issues without feeling like you're betraying a bigger cause. We can talk about both. Let me turn to this nice lady.
Yeah, I wanted to say that for me, the end was just a question mark. And I think I totally identified it with women during the Me Too movement.
Oh, wow.
When they came out with their own stories.
Yes.
And they've been marginalized, and it's been very difficult, but they brought a conversation that we need to have.
Yes.
Because the fate of women is all over the world. And so I thought it was a fantastic movie, and I would like to know where I can recommend my friend to go and watch this movie.
Vous êtes français, vous parlez français. Bonsoir. So our French-speaking lady over here was saying two questions. One was, is the movie available if you want to watch it? And it is available on DVD in Europe with English translation. That's how I got my copy. I wanted so badly to screen this movie at home for some special friends I have. But it's not released in America yet. It is playing the festival circuit, so usually they don't release it. It isn't on Netflix or anything yet. But keep an eye, because with the kind of prizes that it's been winning, certainly it will be available, I think, before we know it. And the other part of your question was about the last scene.
Sorry,
yes, sir. Zach.
It is actually available on iTunes.
Oh, it is now? Okay. You could have told me it was available on iTunes, Zach, before I spent $30 shipping charge to ship it from England. So I guess it's finally out, right? Because Zach is saying that it is available on iTunes. So there you go. And I would definitely try to download it and rent it or buy it, because I think this is the only way we can encourage young filmmakers like Maysaloun, who really found it very difficult to finance this film. This is an Israeli-financed film, which put her in a very precarious position. People were saying, how can you accept purely Israeli funds? Why can they be funded by both? But her answer was, and I'm sad to say that there are very few Arab filmmakers or producers who would have finance this because of the topic. So what do you do if you're Arab and you want to broach this kind of topic? The Israeli Film Fund funded this and let her do what she wanted in terms of they didn't censor her content. She said she wished she got some Arab support or content. Yes, so, Zach. So Zach is saying that we have 2 more questions, one of whom will be Rima over there. But I also want to say that although the question will end, I will hang out. And you can come talk to me about anything you want. Zach, I promised you to share my space here, and I ended up taking over. But poor Zach. Okay, so the lady over there, who I know, where is Reem? Reem, this is Rima. Very close. They both mean gazelle in Arabic. Isn't that a pretty name, Ahmad, for a girl, Reem or Rima? Yes, Rima.
Yes, well, my interpretation of the Polish rape is not necessarily the rape, but I look at it as the situation of battered women who knew or accepted to still marry this guy. She would have ended up, in my opinion, being a massive woman. I mean, it's for, you know, it's representing what could happen and what would happen. And this is something that is common to every culture, because he told her in the car, oh, rest. It was almost like forgive and forget when he told her, we're still continuing. He didn't see it as, I still love you, and this is so typical of men.
Are you saying, Reem, that he didn't see himself as a rapist?
No, absolutely not. No. He thought he was doing what every man should do, and this is international.
And after all, he still is going to marry her, even though I mean, that's probably the most horrible scene. Rima, thank you for bringing that up. She's talking about that rape scene, and I don't want to sort of circumvent it or go around it, because Maysaloun wanted it to be so disturbing and so central to the film. But the attitude of the guy after he raped her was sort of like, but I'm going to marry you anyway, so forgive and forget. Which makes it even more problematic that this guy's like, but then there's the trap that they set for him by sending him, her friend who pretended to be veiled, just to see if this is sort of a systematic kind of thinking, or was it a one-time thing, or was it nude, or was it, whatever. And certainly I think it was this affirmation that you've got rapists walking around all over, and it makes it so much, I don't want to say it makes it worse, but when you are pretending to be so religious, when you're pretending to be so fervor, when you pretend to have such fervor and religious values and whatever, to end up doing that and then walk around like nothing happened, we really need to question, hypocrites.
Several cases of battered women in Lebanon who have been killed in the past.
Now, honor crimes, perhaps, and rape in the Arab world. Yeah. Did you guys hear that in parts of the Arab world, I think Lebanon, there was this discourse, like there was this old law that said that if a man rapes a woman, but then agrees to marry her, then he can't be prosecuted because he's agreed to marry it. Which to me is so horrific, because the woman who has been raped is now, what, you're going to marry your rapist? I mean, it's just beyond kind of comprehension, makes the bad worse. I think that law has been changed. I know in Tunisia and in Lebanon, they've worked on changing this horrible law, but that doesn't mean that this mentality doesn't persist.
Yeah, but it also changed in Lebanon, for instance, and I know the organization CAFA, which is working very hard, is to prosecute battering husband, is to prosecute husband.
Yeah. So there are little organizations in Lebanon, not little so much. CAFA, which means enough, is one of those organizations that are, giving support and shelter and financial assistance and protection to women who are victims of rape or abuse or any kind of discrimination. CAFA, I'm so proud of them. Their name has become synonymous with feminism in the sense of saving women from the kind of mentality we saw in that. And certainly I want to say that in no way should this reflect on Muslims in general. I mean, when you see that, hypocritical guy that I hate in this film, certainly I have got very pious, religious Muslim friends who really understand that Islam is about love and peace and find a way to coexist. So it's really how you interpret the religion. And in terms of the question about, Christian Palestinians, are they any more accepting of their gay children? For example, you know, the movie kind of says, well, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're going to be less or more. I think that it's a question mark, but it's an important one to pose. Yes, ma'am.
So,
Last question, Zach. Last question, Zach.
so the rise of feminism is obviously creates a situation in which men lose power. And I just we haven't talked really about that, but I just wondered how people, the males in this audience, feel about that.
That's a good question. I can ask if you like. I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, maybe the whole notion of feminism as it rose in the 60s and the civil rights movement here, and the fact that culminating in the Me Too movement, certainly there has to be a loss of power by patriarchal males who rule. And again, I'm not saying all male, but she was wondering how, if you identify as a male, you know, how did you feel about the film? I think the gentleman kind of made a very good point of saying it seems they were all tarnished. It seemed there was always, you know, they were all kind of like on the bad side. But I wonder if somebody else would like to speak. I guess they agree with you. Oh, there we go.
Not so much about how I feel as a man.
No, just as a person, sure.
I'd like to emphasize something that's been said before. I don't find that the film's main focus is on homophobia or women's rights or feminist movement. Each one of these women was from a conservative Palestinian family, Muslim, Christian. And they had, one was a doctor, one was a lawyer, one was a student. And from their own perspective, and I think it wasn't essential that they were lesbian or feminist particularly, from their own perspective, they were in between. They had moved, they were in Israel as Israeli citizens, having this connection from their upbringing, and they were existing and changing and being part of this secular society.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the focus of the movie is, not in any particular movement.
That was extremely well said. I hope I can do justice to trying to summarize it in one sentence. But that this gentleman was saying it wasn't necessarily about homophobia or Islamophobia or Palestinians or whatever. And it was more about different kind of degrees of conservatism within the families of those women. But that he was seeing the movie more as a whole, right? Not so much as tackling, you know, LGBT rights or women's rights or whatever, but sort of looking at it within the context of Palestinian families. And certainly we would agree that there are different degrees of conservatism within those families in the movie, and certainly there are liberal or progressive Palestinian families. Zach, thank you so much. Can we give this young man, this guy rocks. Thank you. I'm supposed to share the stage more with you, and I don't take the mic, of course.